Imagine you're on a ship, surrounded by a world of white. Jagged icebergs drift past, silent and deadly. The sea itself is trying to freeze solid, and the air is so cold it burns your lungs. Above, the sky is a perpetual twilight, and somewhere beneath the waves or hiding in the clouds, the enemy is hunting you. This wasn't a nightmare. This was the reality for the thousands of Allied sailors on the Arctic convoys, the most dangerous journey of World War II. In the freezing seas of the Arctic Ocean, these brave crews braved German U-boats, dive bombers, and the brutal elements themselves, all to deliver a lifeline to a nation on the brink of collapse, the Soviet Union. This is the story of their incredible courage and the critical role they played in winning the war. When Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa in June 1941, the German invasion of the Soviet Union, it was a blitzkrieg of shocking speed and brutality. The Red Army was reeling, suffering catastrophic losses in men and equipment. Entire factories had to be dismantled and moved east, away from the advancing German war machine. It seemed as if the Soviet Union might not survive the year. But its allies, Britain and later the United States, knew that if the Eastern Front collapsed, the war would likely be lost. The Soviets had to be kept in the fight, and that meant supplying them with everything they needed, from tanks and planes to boots and beans. This monumental effort was known as the Lend-Lease program. The problem was, how do you get millions of tons of war materials to a country under siege? The overland route through Iran was slow and had limited capacity. The Pacific route was long and threatened by the Japanese Navy. That left the most direct, but also the most treacherous route of all. The sea lane across the top of the world to the Soviet ports of Murmansk and Arkhangelsk. This was the Arctic route. From the moment the ships left their ports in Iceland or Scotland, they were sailing into a gauntlet of unimaginable danger. Let's first talk about the environment itself. The Arctic is one of the most hostile places on Earth. For much of the year, the convoys faced storms with hurricane-force winds that could toss ships around like toys, and waves that would encase the superstructures in tons of ice. This ice had to be constantly chipped away by the crew with axes and steam hoses. If it built up too much, the ship would become top-heavy and simply capsize. In the winter, they sailed through 24-hour darkness, a disorienting polar night that hid both icebergs and the enemy. In the summer, the opposite was true. The midnight sun meant 24 hours of daylight, leaving the convoys completely exposed to attack with no darkness to hide in. And attack, they did. The Germans knew exactly how vital these convoys were. They threw everything they had at them from their bases in occupied Norway. Wolf packs of U-boats stalked the convoys, launching torpedoes from beneath the waves. The Luftwaffe sent swarms of torpedo bombers and dive bombers to attack from the air. The threat was constant and relentless. A torpedo strike in the freezing Arctic water was a near-certain death sentence. Survival time in the Tudegase water was measured in mere minutes. The sailors knew this. Every alarm, every lookout's shout, brought a fresh wave of adrenaline and terror. Beyond the submarines and planes, the German Kriegsmarine also deployed its powerful surface ships. Battleships like the Tirpitz and pocket battleships like the Scharnhorst were a constant menacing threat, lurking in the Norwegian fjords. These surface raiders had the firepower to annihilate an entire convoy and its escorts. The fear of a confrontation with one of these steel behemoths hung over every single voyage. One of the most infamous examples was the fate of convoy PQ-17 in July 1942. Based on intelligence that the Tirpitz was about to attack, the British Admiralty made the fateful decision to scatter the convoy, ordering the merchant ships to proceed independently to Russia while the escort warships withdrew. It was a disaster. Left unprotected, the scattered merchant ships were picked off one by U-boats and aircraft. Of the 35 ships that started, 24 were sunk. It was a brutal lesson in the dangers of the Arctic route. Yet, in the face of all this, the human spirit endured. The sailors on these convoys were a mix of Royal Navy personnel and merchant mariners, ordinary men doing an extraordinary job. They lived in cramped, cold quarters, often wearing the same clothes for weeks. On deck, they worked in temperatures that could plummet to 30 degrees Celsius or lower, where exposed skin would freeze in seconds. They battled exhaustion, frostbite, and the constant, gnawing fear. They watched friends and comrades perish in fiery explosions or disappear into the icy sea. But they never gave up. They knew the importance of their cargo. And what was that cargo? It was the lifeblood of the Red Army. The numbers are staggering. Over the course of the war, the Arctic convoys delivered more than 4 million tons of supplies. This included thousands of tanks, American Shermans and British Valentines, which played a crucial role in pivotal battles like Kursk. They delivered thousands of aircraft, like the P-39 Airacobra and the Hawker Hurricane, helping the Soviet Air Force challenge the Luftwaffe's dominance. They also brought hundreds of thousands of trucks and jeeps, which gave the Red Army the mobility it desperately needed to launch its vast counteroffensives that would eventually push the Germans all the way back to Berlin. It wasn't just weapons. They delivered raw materials like aluminum and rubber, millions of pairs of army boots, and vast quantities of food to feed both the army and a starving civilian population. Every ton of cargo that reached Murmansk or Arkhangelsk was a direct blow against the Axis war effort. It allowed the Soviet Union to not only survive, but to rebuild its strength and become the anvil upon which the German army was ultimately broken. Soviet leaders, including Stalin himself, acknowledged the critical importance of this Western aid. It freed up Soviet industry to focus on producing their own legendary equipment, like the T-34 tank, knowing that the Lend-Lease supplies would fill crucial gaps. In total, 78 convoys sailed the Arctic route between 1941 and 1945. More than 1,400 merchant ships made the journey, delivering a lifeline that helped change the course of history, but the price was immense. Over 100 merchant ships and more than a dozen naval escort vessels were lost, and with them, more than 3,000 Allied sailors lost their lives in the cold, dark waters of the Arctic. They were from Britain, the United States, Canada, and many other Allied nations, united in a common, perilous cause. The story of the Arctic convoys is more than just a chapter in military history. It's a testament to incredible human endurance, a story of an alliance forged in the fires of war, and a tribute to the ordinary men who faced down the wrath of both nature and a determined enemy to keep hope alive. They were, as Winston Churchill called them, on the worst journey in the world. But it was a journey that had to be made, a lifeline that ensured victory. Thank you so much for watching. The courage of these sailors deserves to be remembered. If you found this story as moving and important as I do, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories of forgotten history. We'll see you next time.